Hello and welcome to the Bitcoin Mentor podcast. Today I'm joined by Gary, and normally I say someone's full name, and I'm so sorry, I haven't even asked. Gary, so how do I say your name properly, my man? Welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. I'll just give you the Americanized version. Obviously, Gary and Lee, everybody can pronounce. Just go with Mahmoud. There's a much more Arabic way to pronounce it, but why bother? Who cares?
Don't bother. Okay, so Gary Mahmoud, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
So this is a podcast created by Bitcoin Mentor, designed at this stage to help people understand more about the business itself and what we do, and equally who is involved. So who are the people behind the profile picture on the website? So that's what we're going to explore today. Gary, could you give us a brief introduction? And we've never spoken before, so this works very naturally anyway. Wind the clock back to, teenage years / university. What were your most passionate subjects, or what were you interested in, and what did you study?
I mean, going back even to elementary school, I was always kind of the class clown, so I was always in trouble. And then high school came around when I was always a kid who had to sit by himself because I was getting in trouble with the teachers and everything, and kind of the smart ass in the room. They'd always tell me, well, this is going on your permanent record. But my mom was a teacher. I knew there was no permanent record in elementary school, middle school. So that just, I'm sure, made me more of a horror for my teachers to have. But I knew I had to sort of buckle down in high school. And I tried, under a bit of pressure from dad, doing the responsible thing and studying and going to college and majoring in political science with a minor in history to get that suit and tie desk job. I never where that thought would lead me. And I ended up working on Capitol Hill for about 6 years after college, working for a congressman. My dad loved it because he was always into politics growing up in Egypt. But of course, growing up in Egypt, you couldn't actually say or do anything in politics. The man in charge was the man in charge, and every 5 years they kind of had a vote. And, either you said yes to Nasser or no to Nasser. And of course, he would win with 98.7% of the vote. My dad even told me a story one time when he went in to go fill out a ballot, and they were, of course, armed guards there with, Russian AK-47s, and he's waiting to go into the secret voting booth, and they're looking at him, they said, what are you waiting for? My dad's like, to go into the booth to write. And the guy says, well, you're going to vote for our esteemed president, aren't you? And my dad looked around at all the guns and said, oh, well, absolutely, of course. Give me the pen, right there.
Wow.
So the fact that I was, I guess, working in politics meant a lot to him, so he could live vicariously through me. And then I did my 6 years sitting behind a desk, suit and tie. And, I made some friends, great people that I still keep in touch with. But I just didn't feel like I was doing much of anything. You're working a government job, so a lot of it's taking papers from stack A, putting them to stack B, back to stack A. You're not actually producing anything there, and it can be a little soul-sucking. And I was 29, and I knew if I didn't leave before I was 30, I'd probably never leave. So I walked into the chief of staff's office, and I said, hey, it's been fun. I'm going to move to New York and be an actor. And he laughed. I was like, no, I'm kind of serious. And I went and did it. I kind of had no clue what I was doing, but I did it for a lot of years, and I had a blast. One of the best decisions I've ever made. But always in the back of my mind, there's always kind of a political sensibility, and not to get too deep into politics because everybody has their political preferences, and I'm not here to tell you that I'm right about everything or even many things, but I've always had kind of libertarian sensibilities. Even when I was working in Capitol Hill, I was kind of the token libertarian in the office, which always amused the congressman a little bit. And I remember always thinking, gosh, it's crazy that we talk about living in a free society and free country, free market and all that. And most people have a pretty good sense that price controls are generally a bad idea. But the one thing that government controls the price of is the price of the medium of exchange, the price of money, which also controls the price of time. So it's always been in the back of my mind, like, gosh, how can we get around this massive thing that, government can manipulate the market with at its whim? I remember there was, and I'm not to get into too many tangents, I remember there was even somebody that came up with something called Liberty Dollars. Have you ever heard of this? There was a company that created silver-backed Liberty Dollars, and they were selling them, sort of, and people started using them as a medium of exchange. This is back in the early 2000s, and eventually, of course, the feds got in and seized all of the money and put the people in jail, and, that was the end of that because they said
illegal.
It was illegal. They said it's counterfeiting, whatever. Never mind that the Federal Reserve counterfeits literally every second of every day. But, rules for thee, not for me, sort of. They're allowed to do it. So when I first saw Bitcoin, I guess back in 2012, 2013, it immediately rang true to me. Like, oh my goodness, yeah, this sounds great. But the flip side is I know you encounter something that's too good to be true. You think to yourself, gosh, this is hitting all of my touch points that would make me want to believe in this. So what am I missing? I must have a blind spot here. What am I getting wrong? But I bought my first little bit of Bitcoin back then and, accumulated a little bit through the years and talked to people about it here and there. And I was always intrigued by it. But in the back of my mind, I thought, man, what am I missing? I'm sure there's something I'm missing here that I'm just not getting. And then literally a couple of years ago, a friend of mine recommended to me Seyfried Amos' book, The Bitcoin Standard. And I read through that, and that made everything click for me. Yeah, right there. I was like, okay, I fully understand it now, and I'm a complete Bitcoin maximalist. I love it. I'm all in. And the fact that I found some fine folks here, Ben and Mike, and now you're on the team with an amazing bunch of people over at Bitcoin Mentor, I'm grateful to have the opportunity to sort of help others jump on board and get out of the fiat rat race. So I'm sorry, there's like a 7-minute long roundabout explanation to your question.
It's absolutely brilliant, Gary. And thank you for sharing all of that.
Yeah, no problem.
It is infinitely fascinating to me, the unique sets of perspectives that have to bind together for someone to see the value that is Bitcoin. And I've said this many times before, but we're incredibly lucky that we happen to have those experiences in life that meant that we go, oh, I better take more of a closer look at this thing. And in your introduction there are just so many things that I can draw upon, and we will do that, and we'll get to Bitcoin Mentor, and we'll get to more of the case for Bitcoin later. But I'm intrigued. So Egypt. So are both mum and dad traditionally Egyptian? Or,
oh no! Oh God, no.
Okay.
My father was.
And so teach me about that. So why did Dad leave Egypt, and what was that process like for him, and how does that then affect the way that you think? Do you believe?
My dad, like many people, just wanted a better life. I mean, he was in a crummy country, which is even worse today. And I say that as somebody who still has family in Egypt, and I visited Egypt back in '95, and the history there is fascinating. Went to the pyramids,
it's amazing.
Valley of the Kings,
I've
Luxor,
never been, actually. I'd love to go.
Oh,
yeah.
If you get a chance. This is back, I don't even know if they still have the Great Pyramid of Giza open to the public, but when I went, you could go right inside. And all I needed was like a hat and a whip, and I was set. It was amazing. But, the country, it's poor, and they have a government that just runs people into the ground under a weight of bureaucracy. If you want to open a donut shop, go apply this piece of paper and that piece of paper, and then we're going to run it by the Ministry of Health and then the Ministry of, who knows, maybe donuts, and is this healthy enough for the people? Is this okay? And like, you have people that are going hungry. Who cares how healthy it is? Let it mean something. And it might take 12, 13, 14 months just to open a business. So obviously, they're not going to have much economic growth there. So he left in 1970. He got lucky. He was able to immigrate to the United States after living about a year in Germany with his company there. But he wanted a better life. He was raised in poverty. He was raised with 7 brothers and sisters in a small town outside of Alexandria, the type of place where you might find it in National Geographic, where they bathe and drink and bathe their animals from the very same river. That's what he grew up with, infections and everything all the time. He wanted a place with economic opportunity, political freedom, all of this, of course, relative to Egypt, and he found his way here. But that's my dad's side. My mom's side's 3rd generation from Polish-Russian heritage, Jewish. So that was certainly a fun bit for her side of the family when they found out that she was going to marry this Egyptian dude who was raised Muslim. Suffice to say, the marriage did not last long, but that's all right. Whatever. It made for an interesting childhood.
And that's their journey in a sense. And here you are today on your own journey. And what I love to uncover is these things, they all influence us in some way, and they are who we are today in some senses. Like, you spent 6 years working very closely with the political system in the States, largely because of what you already mentioned, your father's influence and interest in what was politics versus being held at gunpoint in where he grew up. Like, that's just a crazy difference, isn't it?
Yeah.
Wow.
It's insane.
And to vibe on from that, so fast forward a bit, you mentioned you did your 6 years, you're like, okay, there must be something else to life. So teach me, like, what were you thinking, and where did acting come from? Was that always a boyhood dream, or was it something you just went, fuck it, that sounds fun?
I was always the class clown. I'm an only child, so I'm naturally an attention whore. And I had read, a friend of mine recommended to me the book Ayn Rand, The Fountainhead. I'm sure you're familiar with it.
I've not read that book, but I've read Atlas Shrugged.
Sure. And I read that later on after I read The Fountainhead. I mean, shocking. Some random dude who happens to be a libertarian also likes Bitcoin and has read Ayn Rand. Who'd have thunk it? It's crazy. Yeah. I'm one of a kind, totally. Anyway, I read The Fountainhead, and there was a part at the end, I don't know if you know basically the stories about Howard Rourke, who is an architect, kind of his own mind, and he's going to design whatever he wants to design, no matter what other people say. He believes in his artistic vision, and that's what he wants to do. And he had a friend, Peter Keating, who was a pretty darn good natural painter, but he always followed what everybody said he was supposed to do. You have to do the responsible thing, get a responsible job, work for the architectural firm, because that's more responsible than being an artist. That's what his parents wanted. That's what people around him expected. Follow what everybody says is supposed to be the way to design a building. That way you'll get respect and get invited to parties and so on and so forth. And, 20, 30 years go by, and Rourke's career started off very rough because nobody wanted to buy his stuff at first, and only through persistence he was able to kind of impose his artistic vision and find people who did want what he was designing, whereas Keating kind of just drifted along, making money, doing very well for himself. And then I guess when they're in their early 50s, he meets up with his old friend Howard Rourke, and he starts thinking, gosh, what have I done with my life? I feel like, have I lost out on something that I never pursued? And he showed him this painting that he did very recently. And Rourke looks at it and says, I see something in there. And I could tell that you had this gift at some point and you never used it and you lost it. And that just hit me right in the heart. I was like, oh man, what am I doing with myself? And I didn't know if I was going to make it as an entertainer, whatever that means. I just wanted to go give it a try. I didn't want to wake up and be 70 one day and regret not having tried it. So, I did it. And I'm fortunate to be able to do it. Again, I was an only child. My dad did well for himself, coming from like close to abject poverty. So I always knew in the back of my mind that even if I completely fell on my face, there was kind of a backstop for me. My dad did well for himself. Nobody else is getting left that, bit of money that he has. It's going to be me. And hopefully that doesn't happen for a very long time. My father's still alive, lives 6 minutes away from me here in the suburbs. But I always knew that I had that sort of insurance. So when people tell me, oh gosh, it's so brave of you to leave that surefire paycheck and go do this thing. I mean, I may be a little, but there are a lot of other people that would have loved to have done it too, who just couldn't afford to do it, who couldn't take that chance of missing the paycheck. So it's maybe a little bit of courage, but also a lot of good fortune for being in the position that I was in to be able to take that chance to do it.
Awesome. And it's that very tricky thing, even how you frame that in a way, which is you don't choose the cards you get dealt.
No.
But you have to play the best hand that you've got. And so in a scenario in which that's going to be the case, an exercise I really liked that I did relatively recently, actually, when I quit my last Fiat job, was a failure setting exercise where you sit down and you go, if I do what I think I want to do, what's the worst that can happen? And quite quickly you write down like a list of things that, for example, I'll be destitute living under a bridge. And you realize that maybe somebody would be like that. But like more often than not, you dream up all of these terrible scenarios that the probability of them actually happening in the next 12 months, if you decide to make this big change, are very low. And then you end up in a more creative and happier place, which is a very cool experience to go through. And so as an actor, so teach me, so how do you go as 29 years old? Had you acted in the past? Or was it something that you did a lot, like as a teenager maybe, and then you kind of got back into it? Or just pick it up and say, right, chuck me that script, I'm just going to do it?
No, I mean, I dabbled a little bit in high school with a play here or there. I didn't do any of it in college. I didn't touch it at all, not once. And even for a few years after college, I barely did anything. But then I auditioned for this thing called, what I saw was this audition for something called an improv comedy troupe. I've never heard of something like that before. And the way it was described in the audition, it sounded fun. The way it was described in the casting. So I went to Northern Virginia where this troupe was going to hold auditions. And I went down and the guy says, is anybody here familiar with improv comedy? And everybody in the room raised their hand. I was the only one who didn't raise his hand. And then he explained it for anybody in the room who didn't know. And when he explained it, I was like, oh, this is just me making fun of my friends in my dad's basement all through high school. I could do this. And I auditioned and I got in the troupe. And then after that, I did a little play here and there. And I did a lot of dinner theater. And that was kind of fun. That was some of the most fun I'd had performing because the director knew myself and one of the other actors could really handle ourselves off script. So he gave us a lot of leeway to just goof around and go off and improv and do whatever. And I didn't have any formal training or anything. I didn't go to school for this. I just kind of went up and just started hustling, just started asking questions when I moved to New York City. And I have, who can I talk to about getting in a show or getting in maybe a student film or auditioning for a commercial or finding an agent or a manager. I just hustled. I treated it like a business. And I met a lot of people who were very talented who went to college and they have their theater degree, their MFA, Masters in Fine Arts or whatever. And they weren't working as much as me because it seemed like they had felt like, well, I graduated school, I have my piece of paper that says I'm an actor now, I should be in a movie. And I don't know, I didn't treat it like that at all. I treated it like a perpetual hustle. What am I missing? What do I need to learn? Never be afraid to ask questions, always learning, that sort of thing. And I would do anything. All right, you're going to pay $50? Let's do it. You're going to pay nothing? All right, I have time. Let's give it a try. I don't have a family or commitment. Sure, I'll go work for free. Let's see what happens to this project. Maybe it leads to something else, Which is
obviously what happened. And I instinctively want to ask, like, what were some of the Crummier moments that you remember? Did you ever have any things that, oh, fuck, what am I doing? Or just amusing situations you found yourself in?
I mean, I'm sure there were moments where I was just like, ugh, what are we doing here? But those are just smaller moments where for a small production or a production where the director or producer hasn't really thought through their timetable, where they're like, everybody, you're called at 7 a.m. And then they're not using me until 3 p.m. Like, I don't mind showing up on set early. I'll show up on set at 5 a.m. Let's go. Let's play. Let's have fun. But if you're not going to need me until 3, what am I doing sitting here? Can you call me like at 1 o'clock or whatever? But, I mean, those are the only things I can think of. I had an experience I was on. I hadn't really done background work because I always heard there was a difference. If you kind of limit yourself to doing background or extra work, you'll never really focus on making it in real, quote unquote, real roles, speaking roles, co-star, guest star, that sort of thing. But I did submit to do background for Saturday Night Live. You're probably familiar with our American variety show, Saturday Night Live, because that meant a lot to me. I'm a comedy guy and I grew up watching SNL with my dad. So that always meant a lot to me to do that. I said, okay, if I do background for anything, I'll do it for that. And I managed to, they called me up. They said, why don't you come in and, do a show? And I was ecstatic to be there. The pay was hardly anything. I had no lines, but it meant so much to me.
Who cares?
Who cares?
Huge emotional attachment. Love that.
Yeah. And I remember sitting in the green room with a bunch of the other background people they brought in, and I kind of made friends with the guy sitting next to me. We're still good friends to this day. He's a comedian. And I overheard this woman in the back over by the lunch counter saying, oh, gosh, there's always too much tuna and not enough turkey sandwiches that they give us. Oh, it's just awful here. And I'm thinking to myself, is this bitch serious? I turned to the guy next to me. What? Do you know this is the hardest ticket in town to get? You have to enter a lottery. And you have a 1 in 8 chance to get tickets for Saturday Night Live because the studio is so small. It only holds like 120 people. So people are just climbing over each other to get tickets for this show. You only have a 1 in 8 chance to get it. You don't get to choose the date you go. They assign you the date. So you better be around and come to New York for that date. And you're not even guaranteed to see the actual live show. It might just be the dress rehearsal. So we get to see the show. We get to see the show from the stage because we're in the show. And they're paying us to be there. Are you kidding me? Get some fucking perspective, lady. Wow. What are you complaining about? Anyway, sorry, you can bleep out the F.
No, I'm very happy to use profanity to make your point. It's good. Like, what are you doing? I'm serious. Oh, that would drive me mad. Okay, but that sounds fun though. It's even just the whole story you have described then, I can feel how fun it was.
It's amazing.
Obviously, there are moments where it's like, oh, this is really probably a waste of my time. But I love that mentality towards what is effectively a very entrepreneurial journey. I don't care what it is that comes up in my path, whether it's paid or unpaid or doesn't quite make sense. I'm just going to have a go and I'm going to say yes. And it just shows you in some ways how, certainly as you're a little older, let's say 30 and into your early 30s, your approach to life is just so much more mature than a 24-year-old who's just got their acting degree. He's like, I'm done education. I'm ready for the real world. Give me what I'm owed. And I found that problem myself as well. University in the UK spat me out as a 23-year-old with a business degree. And I'm like, cool, let's make lots of money. And no one wants to hire you. You know what I mean? You can't even get the shittest job. And you're like, what the hell is going on? And it's just so fascinating how we get these different... We're basically problem-solving machines, and if you point us in a direction that we find compelling, we'll solve every problem that's on the way there. And so, Gary, are you still an actor now?
I moved to the suburbs in 2020, and I still was booking when I came here. I moved during COVID. You know, I have a couple of kids. We thought, let's get out of the city. The entertainment business had shut down. Why are we paying all this money in New York?
Yes,
and I was
of course,
still,
yeah.
yeah, I was still booking for a couple of years after that. You know, I had roles on a lot of the local, the New York procedurals, like Law and Order and Blue Bloods and FBI and all the stuff that you can think of. You know, and I'm usually playing doctor or lawyer. Come on, say a few lines, sound like I know what I'm talking about, advance the plot, and then you never see me again. So I was sort of booking, but this past year had been very slow. And that's part of the reason why I said, you know what, I've put in 15 plus years in this, and I have no regrets. I've had an amazing time. I've done things that I could never imagine I'd have the opportunity to do. And if this is the end of my go of it as an actor, I'm really okay with that. I mean, sure, if somebody calls me the next day, if Spielberg gets on the phone and is like, we need you for our next movie film, kid. You know, sure, of course.
Gaza, you're in, mate.
Yeah, basically. Yeah, sure. I'm jumping in. But I was looking for something to make some extra money, obviously, because the acting biz had been slow. And I wanted it, hopefully, ideally, to be something that I'm passionate about. Because I know I probably could have gotten a job where I'm just kind of phoning it in and making the paycheck. But I feel like fortunately, again, I'm in a position where I could afford to be a little choosy. Most of the rest of the world cannot afford to be choosy. And every day I think about things like that, and I'm so incredibly grateful to have the opportunity to have the choices that I do. So when I saw an opportunity in the Bitcoin space, something I'm already incredibly passionate about, can I find a way to, yes, make some money and also help bring this, what might arguably go down as possibly one of the greatest inventions in the history of mankind? Can I find a way to help bring this to other people? And I met up with the folks at Bitcoin Mentor, Ben and Mike, and I'm very grateful that they saw fit to include me in this great project they have going.
Yeah, it's going to be a great business to be closely tied to witness how it grows over the next couple of years. There's no doubt about that. Often the way with people that are passionate about Bitcoin, we need to talk about Bitcoin. You know, in a conversation, we've got a whole hour. It's like, hello, let's get into it. You mentioned before that you had a kind of naturally libertarian leaning. Talk to me about what that means to you. And equally, I'm amused by the idea of you being like the token libertarian inside, you know, Capitol Hill. So what was that like, and how did you have that view on the world?
I don't know. I mean, I think it evolved like anything else. I didn't always think that way. And I was probably in high school, I probably started off very left, as many people do. And then I kind of evolved to, I kind of flipped to more of a traditional conservative. And then, you know, I started seeing hypocrisy from both sets of people. And don't get me wrong, I'm sure libertarians have all their hypocrisies too. But the more I learned, the more I realized kind of the less I knew. And the more I saw working in DC about how the sausage is actually made, the more I realized how little the people making the sausage know either. And it's the problem of, oh gosh, Hayek talked about this, and Frederick Hayek, and now I can't think of the term, but it's the knowledge problem. Forgive me. Nobody ever has enough knowledge of everybody's needs or wants at any specific time to accurately central plan for anything. And I may have my own ideas about what I think the best thing is for other people. And sometimes I may be right, but I'll never be right often enough to not make a whole lot of trouble in trying to impose those ideas on other people. So I'm very much a live and let live. I wouldn't want anybody else telling me how to live my life or making my choices. And so by the same token, I don't want to impose what I think is best for others onto them. I'm happy to offer my thoughts if they want to hear it, like with Bitcoin, but it's never anything I'm going to push on people if they don't want to hear about it. So just sort of, yeah, live and let live, sort of a golden rule type thing. And I could support all sorts of Austrian economics I've read, Hayek and von Mises, and, you know, a little bit of Milton Friedman, although he's more the Chicago school. But on a fundamental core level, it sort of boils down to me, just kind of let people do their thing. They know what's best for them, and don't hurt others. Don't take their stuff. Beyond that, you know, try to live your life as best you can. You only get kind of one go round at this, so do your best.
And amen to that. So when you say that you started to understand how little the people that were making the sausage understood how to do so, do you have an example that comes to mind when you think about what you saw going on, like within how government actually functions?
Capitol Hill was filled with people like me, 22-year-old idiots that just got out of college who were charged with advising congressmen on all these different bills up for debate. What do I know? I have no life experience, and yet I'm advising him.
It's almost like when you're fresh out of university, you're the most recently indoctrinated into the philosophies of fiat-funded government without realizing it. That's the irony. And as you quite rightly point out, it's mad. You should be taking advice from someone with expertise, someone who's actually like been through 20 years of figuring out what the right thing to do is, not a 24-year-old in a suit. That's mad, isn't it?
And even the people with expertise, there's no guarantee they're going to agree with each other. You can find two incredibly intelligent people in a given field who 180 disagree on the solution for a given problem. Incredibly intelligent, well-intentioned doctors disagree, well-intentioned engineers disagree, but you're putting somebody in charge here to make a decision for everybody. There's no guarantee that they're right. It's an incredible knowledge problem, you know. And of course, me, an idiot, I had somebody who came in who was pressing me to advise my boss to vote a certain way on this and to put the state, the government, in charge of an issue in his line of work. I don't even remember what his line of work was, but he wanted the government to regulate and manage it. And I said, do you know who the people are who are going to be managing this thing from up on high that you want the government involved in? It's going to be idiots like me. Do you know what I do with my day on your tax dollars? I look at porn and manage my fantasy baseball team. That's the extent of my day. You want some idiot like me managing you? No, don't do that. I have no qualifications for this. And even the people that do aren't necessarily right.
And so when you use that phrase, the knowledge problem, for someone out there that hasn't necessarily studied Austrian economics, I'm not going to ask you to obviously quote this perfectly, but the opposite of the knowledge problem being allowing the free market to operate. So rather than telling people what should be done and deciding on their behalf what the right thing is, you allow someone to make their own decisions. And from my study of Austrian economics, which has also been a big part of my journey, it's amazing. I studied business to a very high level and have been in business for 10 years, and no one's ever once suggested I read an Austrian economics book until Bitcoin comes along, and you're like, well, hang on a second, what are these guys talking about? Time preference and sound money and what the hell? But it's a crucial thing to start researching. Like anyone out there that might be listening that's looking at Bitcoin for the first time thinking, well, what is this thing? Well, the economics that you were taught way back when is incorrect, frankly. And there's another way of looking at the world from an economics perspective that really started in Vienna in the late 1800s is incredibly insightful, and you suddenly have a new lens for the world that you're like, oh, this makes more sense. And so what Gary's referring to in terms of the knowledge problem is people can't decide for other people what the right thing to do is for them at any given time, and that's because as rational individual economic actors at any one time, the value that we assign to things around us is subjective and it can change. So a small example being, if I'm absolutely starving hungry, 99 cents for a Big Mac is seriously cheap and I'll pay that any day of the week. But if I'm not very hungry and I think it's actually dog turd, then I'm not going to pay it. Or, numbers of different situations like that. And it's so interesting, isn't it? You suddenly go, oh, okay, well, this all starts to make more sense. And over the years then, Gary, so if libertarianism was something that had come into your life at an earlier age than Bitcoin did, can you think of any other particularly important things that you had learned in your life that helped you understand Bitcoin? When you say it came along 2013, 2012, it's like, oh, this is too good to be true. Why did you ignore it? What was missing from your understanding that needed to fall into place?
Maybe what I guess was missing was just a more fundamental understanding of what money is. And that's why the Bitcoin Standard by Seyfuddin Amous so clicked with me, because the first 70 to 80% of the book isn't even about Bitcoin. It's just about going back and understanding the fundamental nature of how money as a medium of exchange comes into being. What makes something money, whether it's beads or trinkets or clamshells or lambskin or whatever it ends up being, silver, gold. How do these things organically come to be? Oh, I'll give you one of these because it's worth a future amount of goods and services, and you give me the goods and services for now. And it's just such a fascinating, interesting history of that, that I guess putting all that together with his insightful knowledge of Bitcoin and kind of how secure it is and how tamper-proof it is. I don't say anything's 100% tamper-proof anywhere, even Bitcoin. I'll say it's 99.9999999%, but I don't know if anything's 100% proof of anything. But it really got me on board that, man, this is something that it also is beyond the reach of the state, because if the state, whether it's the American government or foreign governments, at least foreign governments to me, wanted to squash Bitcoin, they would have done it by now. And I'm sure they do want to do it, but they can't. All that combined got me thinking, okay, this is something I can truly, really fully dive into. Because before then, I think all that was really stopping me was just in my mind thinking, gosh, Gary, this, again, it's hitting all of your impulses. You want to believe in this so much, but I had enough, I don't know if it's right, but I usually have enough sense to think, okay, something that's too good to be true. What am I missing here? I feel like I'm a relatively intelligent person, but I know there's a lot of people out there smarter than me. So what am I missing here? I know what my blind spot is. What am I not seeing? But, having accumulated sats here and there for a few times here and there through the years, once I read that book, I was fully all in. And then, of course, I listened to Robert Breedlove interview with Michael Saylor in the Saylor series. And, oh, my gosh, that was mind-blowing. Mind-blowing. I mean, the man is amazing. And then I jumped into all sorts of other things. But it's great. I love it. I wish everybody could have access to it. I wish my family in Egypt could have access to it. But the government is so stringent about trying to find people who have it. They threaten to jail people
really?
Here and there. Yeah, wow. They're very strict about it there. People can still do it, but you're taking a risk. The government can't stop you from holding it. They can never get your coin if you hold the keys in your head, but it's a dictatorial state. If they don't like what they see you're doing, they're just going to toss you in jail. Yeah. So I wanted to be able to get the family there. My father sends money over there semi-regularly to help support the family, but I've told him for years you wouldn't need to keep doing this if you just sent them Bitcoin to begin with. But he's nervous about it.
Yeah, fair enough. I always find it very interesting what different pieces of the puzzle have to fall into place at different times, and everyone's different. So for people out there listening, all of us have been on very personal journeys to come to a point where, like, oh my gosh, Bitcoin's super interesting. I have to A, buy more of this stuff, but then B, I want to spend my time working on this thing to help other people or help myself or whatever the case might be, build a business in the space. And so to some of the listeners, they might well be thinking, oh, do you know what, maybe I would like to sign up with the Bitcoin Mentor, and not just to be a customer of the business and gain from the expertise of the mentors, but to become a mentor themselves. So perhaps, Gary, you could spend just a moment chatting through the experience you had applying for the business and what your experience has been like so far within the company.
Sure. I applied. I sent in my resume, sent in a cover letter, sort of standard things. I tried to be very personal in the cover letter about my passion for Bitcoin and how this isn't just another job for me, another paycheck. I mean, if it were that, I would not be working for Bitcoin Mentor, because I sure haven't made much money off it yet. But I love being part of it, because even not making money, it's been an opportunity for me to learn and meet wonderful people who were very gracious with their time and their energy and their knowledge, and I've learned so much. So it's wonderful. If this is something you're passionate about, please, we would love to have you on board. I know so many people in there who are so knowledgeable as part of our small team now. When I applied, Ben and Mike got me on the phone and we chatted for a bit, and I could tell that they were pretty down-to-earth guys and straight shooters, which is what I look for. As you can probably tell, I'm not somebody who likes to put on a lot of airs. What you see is what you get.
No, that's good. That's good.
Yeah, and Ben had me kind of go through a mock teaching session as if it would be teaching him as a newbie how to go about purchasing and self-custodying Bitcoin. And I did the best I could. I feel like I'm pretty decent at explaining things, kind of breaking somewhat complex topics down into easily digestible bites. So it seemed like a good fit for me. Now, that said, there are people in Bitcoin Mentor who are far more knowledgeable than I am. There are people who could tell you all the ins and outs of running your own node and mining and, third level transactions, third layer transactions. And it's wonderful. And if you are somebody who is already sort of in the Bitcoin world and you're looking to kind of up your game, there are people in Bitcoin Mentor who you should go to, because they are amazing and they're so knowledgeable, and I'm learning from them. But if you are somebody who's kind of getting started and not necessarily a tech guy, and I never have necessarily been a tech guy, I promise you anybody can learn this. Just take some time, a little bit of focus and some interest, and I am more than happy to walk you through the beginning steps and answer any questions you have.
And I think it would be fair to say that the initial interest of the business, we're about to launch our first episode of the Bitcoin Mentor podcast. It'll go out live today, and Mike was episode number 1. And it's pretty clear so far that there's kind of 2 types of characters that are approaching the Bitcoin Mentor as customers. One is someone who is really trying to do very simple things like, how do I buy Bitcoin? How do I move Bitcoin from an exchange into my own wallet? Which wallet do I use? How do I store it correctly? And they're fundamental questions to starting to become a Bitcoin adopter. And that's great. So that's the one side. And the other side is someone who's got a far more complex problem where they've basically overcomplicated their tech stack and they've misunderstood the difference between a passphrase and a seed phrase.
We've had that.
Now, like, yeah, right. So Mike told me about that specific situation. And it's like, oh my God, I've lost my own Bitcoin by trying to be too clever. And it's not trying to be too clever, but you might be following a tutorial and you take a step that wasn't in the tutorial, or the tutorial's missed a step, or whatever the case might be. And suddenly it's like you've got very real value sitting in a wallet that you can see, but you can't move it.
Yep.
And so that is the problem with Bitcoin, in that it's true accountability. You are being your own bank. And in order to be your own bank confidently, there's a load of expertise that you have to figure out. And one of the things that excites me so much about Bitcoin Mentor as a business is I believe there's a lot that people can get in terms of value that's not necessarily readily available in the marketplace. A lot of us had to hack together solutions to get to where we are today. We got it wrong a lot. And there wasn't an obvious kind of Bitcoin-focused consultancy company that you could call. Like, who are you going to call? They're all technology companies that sell, a Trezor, but they don't have a customer service department you can call up and be like, hey, I plugged my Trezor into your Unchained Capital vault, and then I used another tech. It's like this whole suite of different things that you're plugging together. There's no one way of skinning that if you're a tech provider that's like 20% of the tech stack. And so I'm very excited about it as a company because we'll be able to help lots of different people. And I'm glad to hear that you had such an exciting experience. What I hope will happen, again, if anyone's thinking to apply to become a mentor like Gary, is with time, we will, and that's one of the reasons for doing this podcast, we will start to generate lots of leads as a business and as a brand. And we'll be able to feed those leads into mentors that don't necessarily have an existing digital footprint and aren't content creators, but they're absolute experts in their field of Bitcoin, which is going to be great. Yeah, I mean, Gary, anything that springs to mind to add to that as an experience you've had through the process that you'd like to share?
I've learned.
Have you done a session with someone yet as a customer?
No, I had one that Mike offered me, somebody who signed up, and my lady happened to be in the hospital at the time, and I couldn't do it. And then we had a second one who was interested, and we chatted for a bit. He said he was going to go on vacation, and then never heard from him again. But this is, I don't take anything like that personally or anything. I've been in my business, the acting business, is just one rejection after another. So, maybe something happened. Maybe you decided he wasn't interested for now. Maybe he'll come back later. No problem at all. We're here for you whenever you decide you might need our help. That's the thing.
I mean, episode number 2, the business has been live in Canada for not even 3 months, I don't think. Australia, we launched just on the weekend, so it's very early days. And we will, without a doubt, get better at our service and get better at our product, and more importantly, get better at describing it to people. And this is one of the difficult things when you set something up to start with. It's like, how do you actually get people's attention and explain to them that you can deliver value without, them dropping off somewhere? And if they drop off, well, they just weren't the right person. And that's also okay, as you say. But yes, it's entrepreneurial, and as a result, taking rejection is a critical part of that. But I like the phrase, you don't fail, but learn. And that's essentially what's going on the whole time. Now, Gary, I have to rewind slightly because you did catch my attention when you spoke about your father sending money to Egypt and what it was like in Egypt, trying to use Bitcoin and how potentially scary that is. Are you able to share any more details on why that's the case, and how does Bitcoin fit into that? Why is it so important that we help to foster this nascent technology, and why would you like to be sending it?
Well, the state in Egypt, what little I understand, the government has such a tight control on the Egyptian pound that they want people to use it. The exchange rate they offer for the dollar, which is still sort of the world's reserve currency, for better or worse, is far below the market rate of what you're actually going to get for a dollar, like on the Egyptian streets. I think it's something like, 40% of what a dollar is actually worth there. So when you go and send in dollars from here, to Egypt through official channels, the people have to take it and they have to exchange them for Egyptian pounds. And the state is going to take their cut because they keep an artificially low exchange rate on it. If you can do it through Bitcoin, obviously that circumvents that. But the state, for whatever reason, different governments feel like if they allow Bitcoin, they lose some element of control over their people. So they very much pushed back against it, have threatened people with jail time, or not. But expanding back from Egypt to the rest of the world, Bitcoin is this. I don't need Bitcoin. I don't. I'm fine. I happen to live in one of the richest countries in the history of mankind. I happen to live in one of the most free, relatively prosperous times in the history of mankind. Whenever I'm feeling down and I feel sorry for myself about something, I think to myself, Gary, you are the 1%. People here in America, we protest against, the 1%. I'm the 1%. I'm among the most fortunate people who's ever lived on the history of this planet, just based on the fact that the country and time in which I live. So this isn't for me. I'd be fine without Bitcoin. It wouldn't be as good as it could be. Things could be a lot better, no doubt. But even without Bitcoin, I'm fine. Bitcoin is for the people around the world who have no other option, who don't have easy access to dollars, who don't live in a country where it's relatively easy to be able to open a business, to pursue your dreams, to transact freely, to build something. I remember listening, I don't know if it was Robert Breedlove, one of his interviews, and it might have been with Saylor, talking about how there's a country in South America where people collect cinder blocks and they put their money into cinder blocks because they know the cinder blocks won't lose value relative to their currency, and that's their form of gold. And they use it to build their houses, but if they need to transact something, they use these cinder blocks, these bricks, and they haul them around. And how fortunate am I here that I don't have to do this? I have the luxury of living relatively close to the world's money printer. So no, Bitcoin, it's great. I love it. I believe it, and I believe it can make the world, my country, a better place and make the world a better place, especially for the worst off. So that's part of the reason why I'm so passionate about it. It's so egalitarian. You don't have to have a lot of money to begin with. You don't have to have political connections. Like you said, be your own bank. You can build your own worth, build your own value, and you don't have to get anybody else's permission to do it, at least in theory, unless the government catches you and tries to lock you up. But, you can stay one step ahead of them.
In Egypt, if you were to send Bitcoin instead of sending dollars that get converted to pounds?
It's a good question. I don't know exactly. My father is very insistent that it's very dangerous and that we shouldn't do it because people have been hauled into jail for even just talking about it. That said, I know there's been situations. I just listened to a podcast the other day. I think it was with Natalie Brunel, where she interviewed an Egyptian guy who started a business in Egypt, initially dealing with Bitcoin, and he tried to get the state to cooperate with it. And this is in the earlier days of Bitcoin. And they said, no, we don't want anything to do with it. He left before any trouble happened. So I don't know the actual degree of danger. In theory, maybe I could send somebody some money to put in a cold wallet or a hot wallet, and maybe nothing happens. I don't know, but my dad is very leery about taking that chance. And from the little reading I've done, I've heard the government tries as best as they incompetently can to crack down on that sort of thing and haul people in if they feel like they're hiding money in Bitcoin or any other crypto.
I mean, at the end of the day, it's up to the individual, isn't it? It's what feels right for you is totally the right option. It is a direct threat to particularly egregious governments, though. There's no doubt about that. And even though the United States is the world's central bank and debasing everyone for fun, and there's a long list of problems with every country in many ways. But you are right, like perspective is one of the key things here, where it's like, well, hang on, how bad is the status quo for me versus other parts of the world? And I did some amazing interviews speaking with people. I used to have a podcast that's called Bitcoin with Jake, and I did 80 episodes with people all over the world, and places like the Philippines or Guatemala, or if you'd grown up in Venezuela, for example. I spoke to a guy who was born in Caracas, and I mean, it's just absolutely insane what these governments were doing with the money and how that then impacts the day life of a citizen of that country. And Bitcoin solves that. I personally believe that the real product market fit for it is in places like that. And if you're like myself, grown up in the UK, I lived in Singapore for a bit, and now I live in Australia. My wife's Aussie, so I moved to Australia. And you're essentially financially privileged beyond belief. And you speak to someone who was running a cool thing in Boracay in the Philippines. 60% of Filipinos are unbanked. They don't even have bank accounts, right? It's absolutely crazy. And it's like, how are they even doing any trade? I don't understand how it work. And that's just one's perception is just completely wrong, because you just have such a different experience in your own world. I'm with you. I totally agree that Bitcoin is the building block for a much better future. And it's only through owning it for a long time now, almost 10 years I've had some Bitcoin, but I made a lot of mistakes through it. I sold it for stupid stuff like a 40-year-old classic car. I went on holiday with my girlfriend, now wife, went and did a whole load of things that, like, I didn't know that I owned digital scarcity. I didn't know that I owned the first form of sound money to potentially perfect the characteristics that the Austrian school have studied for 150 years. I didn't know that there was actually a money printing problem, in most parts of the world. I didn't know that governments were using money as a way to control their populations, in particular in kind of autocratic regimes. It's wild once you start thinking, oh, it's all about the money, honey. And you're like, oh. And suddenly you're talking about human rights, property rights, environmentalism, all back to this one subject. Well, as a result, it's very compelling, isn't it? Here we are in this podcast, completely passionate about it and setting up a business and getting involved. Oh, Gary, awesome. Well, it's been an amazing kind of 45 minutes or so as we've run through all these different parts of your life and experiences that you've had. Thank you for sharing. As we start to close things up, is there anything else that you would like to mention that was particularly important for you as part of your Bitcoin journey that really helped you pay more attention, or was an area of your life that you didn't realize it was going to impact but has?
I do wonder sometimes, if I didn't have kids, if I'd be as passionate about Bitcoin. I mean, I already love the idea of it. It hits my political, philosophical sensibilities. But another part of it is very personal and grounded to me, in that I am stacking sats, as we say, not for me. I mean, for the most part, I don't imagine I'll ever be spending most of this myself, probably hardly any of it. In my mind, this is for my kids someday, and for their kids someday. When it's worth a lot more, or at the very least when it's usable in a world where these competing fiat currencies just sort of lose their value and are hard to keep up with. And Bitcoin's this thing that it's very difficult to seize and take from you, unlike any other store of wealth, if you manage it properly. So I view it, I don't think I'd have as much as I do if not for the knowledge of I need to make sure that I leave something that is solid for my kids. And the crazy thing is, and this is a whole other conversation with the missus, it's even got me thinking about maybe adopting. I don't know if we'll ever do that or not, but there are kids around the world who, my goodness, it might be, I have this wealth now that, I don't want to just leave everything to my kids where they don't feel that they have to work or feel entitled or use their brains. I want them to have enough where if anything bad should happen, okay, they'll be okay. But I feel like I have this wealth now that I'm building that I could help other people with. So anyway, that's a whole other ball of wax. That's a whole conversation with the missus. We'll see if that ever happens. But yeah, I think the personal idea of having children has made me all that much more into Bitcoin. Is this something that will last beyond me?
I have my third child is due in September. So I've got 2 daughters and a third one on the way. It's awesome. Very grateful to have got to this particular phase of my life. And all the cliches of becoming a parent are so true. Your perspective on everything changes. And you're like, whatever. And then suddenly you're holding this little thing and you're like, oh my God.
Yeah.
Now I understand what this is all about. And obviously highly encourage it to anyone out there to get cracking and have kids and get on with it. We spend too much time either single or waiting for some reason, I think, in hindsight. But you're right. Every time you're buying some Bitcoin, if you can store this thing effectively for the next 20 years, then, I mean, it's as good a thing you could possibly inherit, in my opinion. And for that reason, it makes your incentive very different, doesn't it? And you are right. People are incentivized differently. If they're adult and haven't got kids, then they think completely differently. And that's not to say Bitcoin can't help them in some way. Absolutely.
Yeah.
But perhaps this is more of a reflection on the fact that the problem that you were really feeling was like, how do I give something to my children in the future? And now this has really clicked in. You go, oh, that's what makes the most sense for me. Interesting. Okay. Well, Gary, thank you so much. A final question will be, where can people reach out and have a chat with you if they want to get in touch?
Sure. You can email me at gary@bitcoinmentor.io. I'm happy to check that and reach out back to you. You can go on the Bitcoin Mentor website if you want to take a look at all the fantastic mentors we have there. If you find somebody else you think would be a better fit for your problem, go to that person. I don't take any personal offense. I don't know. You can see me act like a clown on social media. Look me up on IMDb. GaryMahmoud.com. You'll see all the silly stuff I've done if you just want to get 3 minutes of entertainment, and you can see some sketch comedy pieces I've written. But this is
awesome.
It's not about that. This is about Bitcoin. So stick to Gary at BitcoinMentor.io and check out BitcoinMentor.io.
Thanks, Gary. In a weird way, it is about that. Like, I'll be having a look at GaryMahmoud.com or whatever it is after this. I think people really appreciate like honesty, authenticity, good stories, and that's just as much a part of bringing people along the journey that is Bitcoin than anything else, frankly. So, yeah, awesome. Gary, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate it.
Thanks, Jake.